Hello, my name is Gene Monterastelli, and I am the editor of TappingQA.com. And the video that you are about to watch is an interview that I did as part of the 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping was a free event, which was a fundraiser for the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network provides training and trauma relief tools to those in war-torn countries, as well as working with refugees all over the world. They've been able to help out over 200,000 people all over the world. After you watch this video, if you find this video something that was useful, the very easy way that you can say thank you to the guest for giving their time and sharing their expertise is to go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support and make a small contribution to support the Peaceful Heart Network. Again, that is 24hoursoftapping.com/support, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. We're going to move on to my conversation with Mitch Gainey. Mitch is a trainer for Evidence Based EFT and is passionate about using tapping at the intersection of trauma and spiritual growth. He's worked internationally with executive and community leaders, helping them to overcome their internal blocks by listening to their intuition so they can make a difference that they dream of. This conversation was absolutely surprising and absolutely delightful. I love the way in which Mitch is able to talk about a very delicate, sensitive topic where he's able to respond to trauma that might have happened and still honor things that are good in the world around that particular event. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Mitch about tapping for religious trauma. The question that I've been asking people through this entire event as we've been talking about the different topics, because the topics have been surfaced by people like you. Why are you interested in creating transformation around religious trauma, and maybe inside of that create a definition for that so that we're kind of on the same page so people know what you're talking about and thinking about when you go after an issue like this?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. I think that definition is really important because religion does play, and has played a significant role, not only in some of our individual lives, but even our kind of cultural lives or our family lives. So it's a big part of human existence.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of research that says that religion can actually be a very positive, beneficial thing for people. It can be a preventative health measure. It can be a resource for a lot of people. But there's also this growing body of research which is coming through saying some forms of religious experience can be quite damaging to us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take the broader definition of trauma, of any experience, prolonged experience, one-off experience that causes harm or damage or a felt sense of a lack of safety in the body,
Mm-hmm.
and we marry that up with some of our religious experiences, we can kind of start to get that definition that some religious beliefs, some religious communities, some religious experiences can just make our little child body and brain feel a bit unsafe, or even our adult body and brain unsafe. And even if we've left certain religions and been shunned or just lost our roadmap for the world, that can be kind of traumatizing for us. So religious trauma, simple definition, is any experience with religion that has left a negative imprint in our system.
And I mean, I can certainly see that, like there's also countless stories that we know inside of our lives and inside of our culture, seeing that, because we step into these religious institutions that are built on high ideals, that are created by flawed, broken, traumatized, power hungry, like we bring all of our human experience to that, and all of a sudden we're placed inside of that. And even with the best intentions, even with people who think that they're working from a place that they think is thoughtful and deliberate, they're not thinking of the human condition. They're not thinking of those who are there. And I think, like what you identified, particularly as children, like it's inside of our tribe. It's the place we're supposed to belong. And it's this place where it's supposed to, like, the story we are told about our spiritual and religious institutions is this is the place that you go to healing and lift up and that sort of stuff. And then if you're in one of those circumstances where you're not treated with that sense of dignity, or you're being treated in a harmful way, it's really hard to square that circle, particularly as a child trying to figure all of that out.
Definitely. We've got, you get this language of this is what love looks like. But
Right.
also, if you don't agree with it, you might be punished for eternity, or you'll be rejected not only at the end of life, but maybe in this life as well. So it can set up quite a strong push-pull fear dynamic in people as well.
And so what got you initially interested in
Yeah,
like
so
this
my
being a
origin
topic and a part of your life?
Yeah, so I started going to church when I was about 3 with my mother and my older sister. And, for the most part, it was actually a very positive experience of community, ritual, and all of those types of things. Hearing this idea of a loving being, a loving God. And then as we got older, I kind of got more interested in it. And there's an interesting dynamic of I probably started developing some anxiety and started getting more into religion. So there's an interesting play to look at there as well. But I started going to more fundamentalist type churches and more kind of extreme Pentecostal evangelical churches. And there's some very beautiful versions of that as well. But in going through that and having some very intense emotional experiences, some very intense spiritual experiences, in a way, I was quite successful in that environment. I was going to become a pastor. I used to sing. I used to do a lot of prayer ministry for people. For me, I also had this growing awareness of my sexuality around being part of the LGBTQ plus community. And that's probably where this interest started, of me being like, oh, I'm not safe here. I went through a lot of kind of pray the gay away stuff, conversion therapy, told I had demons, told that I was going to burn in hell. And then kind of lost all of my community in my late teens, early 20s. And the trauma that set up for me. And then the process of recovering that, of healing that wound, and also recovering what was good from that part of my life as well, because I didn't want to just throw it all out. I was like, I want to come back into touch with my sense of spirituality. Now, that's evolved and changed over the time, but that's kind of what's got me interested in this topic.
And I think that the two things that you kind of mentioned in the definition that we hear in your story, I think are really important for us to hear. Is one is about the experience of how you were treated. The second was the loss of community, because as you mentioned, as a person who is in a circumstance that is not just showing up as a member of the congregation, but taking a leadership role and having it be this focal point of your life. I'm guessing that in addition to doing things in formal ways in the ministry, you were spending time socializing with these people and all of that sort of stuff. And then to be in a circumstance where when you decide to step away from that, you're not just stepping away from a place that feels dangerous to you, you're also stepping away from this place where you have community and connection and all of that. And so now you don't have the tether of a worldview, and you don't have a community that's supporting you. And I just can't imagine like how disruptive and disorienting that is in that moment.
Yeah, it is very disorienting, because you, as you said, you not only step away from a community that you have this very strange relationship with, of I love you and you love me, but you also don't. And I don't know how to kind of be in this space and feel safe. And then I kind of go out into the big bad world that I've been told is evil, demonic, that I can't trust others, that I can't trust myself. And all of a sudden I've got to make decisions for myself of what do I think about these other people that I've been told are bad my entire life. So it can be kind of stressful.
Yeah. I'm guessing that is an understatement, calling it kind of stressful at that particular point. So then share as much and as little as you'd like here. How then did you start to navigate that process where you started to find your way to ground, find your way to support, and find your way to understand the things that were traumatizing you? Because I think oftentimes when we're in the midst of trauma, particularly something that is a community that what they're saying is culturally normative, it's really easy to go, it's not I'm being injured by this thing, but I am bad. And I think of Brene Brown talking about the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt, I've done something bad. Shame, I am bad. And And so how did you start to like turn that around in your own personal journey that allowed you to, like, you know, be in a circumstance where you have a thoughtful conversation, be in a circumstance where you're able to be a helper in the world? Like, what did that navigating process look like for you?
Yeah, well, shame and guilt I had in bucket loads.
Yeah.
And it was a really somatic experience. I carried with me this very deep sense of there's something wrong with me and I can't figure it out. And you know, people have very different experiences. Some people grow up in that environment and they don't really have a sense of spiritual experience. It was just kind of, you know, I grew up in this environment. I didn't really believe in it. And so I left. And I don't want to have anything to do with it. My experience was a little bit different in the sense of I had a lot of experiences and I had a lot of, I guess, intuitions about who I thought that which we might call God is. And so for me, there was always a sense of, I don't really get you and I'm kind of scared of you, but there's something within me that still tells me that there's something in life that is inherently kind and good and wants the best for me. So that was a resource for me that I kind of lent into. And also I was, some might say religious in my, my belief that I should be well, that I should have a sense of wellness and safety in my life and my body. So I threw myself into whatever therapy was going to help me. To try and process and untangle, well, what was good and true from that experience and what was actually quite damaging, which was also a hard experience because there's a little bit of a sense of, I can talk bad about my family, the church, or this religious organization. You haven't had anything to do with them, so you're not allowed to talk trash about them. Or you don't get it. But the big turnaround for me, and not just because we're doing a tapathon, was actually I came across the work of Dr. Laurie Layden, which then led me to Dr. Peter Stapleton. And I was went and did Dr. Peter's training. And during, I think we'd just shown this video about trauma or something like that, and then all of a sudden all of mine got activated. And in a simple practice round with someone else doing the training, a very distinct memory came up of being told that I was bad and that I had something wrong with me and that I was, you know, demonic and all that stuff. And I was having a full-on trauma reaction. And this, my tapping partner under the supervision of Dr. Peter just very gently led me through a simple tapping exercise. And all of a sudden I could breathe, and what felt like this big pressure on my heart that I'd had for 7 years or something like that, I think by that stage, just went away. And I was like, holy crap, what is this? And I threw myself into learning whatever I could about tapping, and first and foremost, just addressing the somatic experiences in my body of when I thought about this idea of God, when I thought about some of the key moments of my upbringing. Even when one of the things that I did was I would get the Bible out in front of me and I would just look at the Bible and tap. Certain verses that used to really scare me, I would tap on those verses and whatever. And I just took it really slow. Sometimes I kind of threw myself into, I've got to get through all of this. There's a bit of my trauma patterning. But really for me, it has been the somatic work, the tapping, and slowly coming into, I use a lot of focusing. So Gene Genlin's work of just what's here, what's present, and can I learn to trust it? And often I'm doing that with a lot of tapping. Because there's 20 plus years of imprint in me of, can I trust myself? Is this trustworthy? Am I okay? Am I good? So lots of therapy, lots of self-reflection, and a whole lot of tapping.
So there's two things that lots of great stuff in there, but there's two specific things I want to tease out of there. The first is the fact that you had this inherent understanding that I'm made for health and well-being.
Yeah.
Like the fact that even in the midst of all of this, and so as people listen, like, know that is true for you as well. Like, regardless of what the experience is, regardless of what you've come from, like, we are made for health and wealth and health and well-being. We'll get there. And I think it's like, I think that's a really, really valuable thing for all of us to hear, because again, as we look at this sense of guilt and shame, shame saying I am bad, sometimes we choose that as an intrinsic state. Like, I'm to the point that I'm now so broken, it is impossible for me to be whole again. And the fact that you had that in there is really super awesome. The second thing that I love to hear is the fact that even though there were times that you wanted to press forward, it was slow, it was deliberate, it was slow, it was deliberate. And I think, like, I'm so happy that in the tapping community that we're not talking about 1 session, 1 minute miracles the way we used to a decade ago. And the fact that you're just like, this is okay that I go slow. And I guess the third thing that I really love about that is oftentimes we hear, in order for tapping to be successful, we need to be as specific as possible. And what we hear is, I need to be specific. And there's a difference between being specific and as specific as possible. And the fact that you're like, oh, here is an object that is a book that is now very, very loaded with all of these memories and all of this emotion and all of this stuff, because of the way, particularly in the Christian tradition, we deal with the Bible as this thing that is more than just an idea, but it is the holy book. And just being in the presence of that is something that creates that emotional response. And the recognition of, I just need to be in the present of this thing that reminds me of the stuff. And that is enough of an entry point for me to start. And so I think that's just so lovely that you understood that I don't have to pick out this particular sermon on this particular Sunday where this particular story was being told. And I was feeling this thing as I was sitting in the pew and going through all of that. If those come up, those are great and useful for us to go after. But the fact you're just like, oh, this one verse, this one book, sitting in this congregation, thinking of these people. The other thing I think is awesome is the fact that, like, I want to bottle this particular piece of it. The fact that you're able to take this experience that is traumatizing and still ask the question, what is useful and what is good from that? And not that we want that being traumatized is good, because sometimes it's like, there's a great lesson here and it's good that you went through this stuff. This is an opportunity for you. It's not that. Like, it sounds like what you're able to do, and maybe this is because of all the healing and transformation, looking back, you're able to go, these are the parts that are traumatizing that I need to heal and let go of. And there was still some useful and some good and some healing and transformation that happened inside of it. And like, the fact that you have that doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be our immediate step. Like, I'm guessing, and I would love to hear your experience, in the beginning, that probably wasn't the initial disposition. I'm guessing in the beginning, it was just, oh my gosh, this is a horrible thing that I need to heal my way through. And as the healing happened, you then created space to ask that question. Is that fair understanding of what that transformation process looked like? Or did you have that from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think, look, I think one of the things to talk about with religious trauma and this idea of, I can never say this word, specificity, being specific,
We got there. Yep.
is that religious trauma can often look like complex trauma. It's not often just one particular event. It's, the first 12 years of your life being told that if you don't agree with this, if you don't believe this, you will burn in hell for the rest of your life. It's pretty scary for a little kid. Or I have a particular memory of, and not every kind of church believes this, but the idea of being left behind and the rapture.
Yeah.
And I remember waking up I had an afternoon nap, and I think my parents had gone up the road or something like that and wouldn't take my older sister. And so I woke up into an empty house, and I must have been like 8 or 9.
Right.
I know I've been left behind.
That's
I
right.
wasn't good
Rapture's
enough.
captured. Look at this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember doing a bit of a tapping session on that. I think for me and for a lot of people that I work with, and I work with some people who go, do you know what? I want to have nothing to do with religion, faith, spirituality. I need hard facts and science.
Yeah.
And that is how I navigate the world, and that's how I have peace. And I work with people. I just got back from the UK, where I spent time with people that I've known for 14 years who are still actively involved in church, and
Right.
who are some of my dearest and closest friends. And they do tapping with me as well. And they use tapping to enhance, I guess, their relationship to spirituality and faith, and to heal some of the wounds from that very human community experience as well.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was a constant pulling and tearing apart this very knotted knot. There were days where I just went, I want nothing to do with this. It was so damaging, and anything and anyone to do with it can.
Yeah.
Swearing in anger is very good in this healing process as well. And then there were other times where I reflected on, from a young age, I was deeply spiritual. One of my earliest memories is sitting in my bed and going, God, I don't know how to pray, but I'm just going to sit here in silence and trust that you know what I'm supposed to be doing. And I must have been like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So again, it was just, where am I now? Today, I don't want to have anything to do with it, and I'm really angry and I'm pissed off, and I need to tap through that and accept that and allow myself to do that, because I'd also been told my entire life I wasn't allowed to question, and I couldn't be angry at God or the church or my pastors.
Yeah.
And that the heart above all things is wicked and deceitful, and I can't trust myself. So I had to tap on that. And then there were other days where I had to really sit with my grief of, I really loved singing, and I really loved being in these experiences, and I really loved the community aspect of it. And I deeply miss that. And I'm very frightened of going back into that space, because what if I get hurt again?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just, and this is how I work with people, it's just, where are you now? What is your goal today? It might change tomorrow, but what's your goal today? And sometimes people go, do you know what? I really miss this aspect, but it's got so much baggage around it. Okay, well, let's sit with that and do some tapping. And other days it's, I don't have anything to do with this, and I've got this very distinct memory of this that I'm really pissed off about. Cool, let's go there and just see what's here afterwards.
And I think that's good and useful to hear, regardless of the type of issue that we're tapping on, not just religious trauma, that some days we have a relationship where I'm trying to heal my relationship to whatever it is. And it could be, sexual relationships, it could be food, it could be whatever. And other days it's like, this thing has harmed me so much, I just need to escape and evacuate from this in every way possible. And as you're talking about that, I was reminded of, there was I guess it was in the late 90s, there was a movie starring Robert Duvall called The Apostle. And he was one of those big tent preacher revivals who traveled around the southern United States. And there's this one scene where he's in his bedroom and he's like, we're fighting God. And was like in the circumstance where, even though he even felt called to ministry and felt that was the place, there was still this place of, where I am today is I'm really hurt and broken by this particular relationship. And I think it's really good, again, with this sort of thing or anything else, to give ourselves permission to, whatever we're trying to transform, we're allowed to have a different relationship to that every single day. And the place that we start, just like you said so succinctly and so beautiful, where are you at today? Let's start at that particular spot and just use that as the entry point. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love tapping so much as a modality, is it allows us to do that. Like some days it is something that is completely physiological. Some days it's super, super heady refrains. Some days it's just like, oh, this is really a crappy feeling, and I'm just going to tune into the crappy feeling and see if I can find some relief to that. And I think that's a healthy thing for all of us to hear as we're thinking about our transformation process, that we can navigate it in so many dimensional ways. And where you are today is not wrong. Where you are today is just the place that we're starting. And be us tapping on our own or working with a skilled practitioner, it's a good thing to give ourselves permission to do that. I was working with a client earlier this week around some really spiritual stuff. And she was just like, because there was later in life, the spiritual giftedness was starting to grow inside of her, and she didn't have vocabulary and whatever. And she's like, Gene, I'm really afraid to say this out loud, but I know you, and I know you talk about this stuff some of the time. And we did a lot of work. And at the end of it, I'm like, thanks for trusting me. And everything you said was exactly right because it's where you are. Like, as a practitioner, my thought is I show up as the color of water. I'm just supposed to reflect back to you, but giving people permission to do that, I think it's just wonderful to think about it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's probably an important thing for any practitioner, is that you want to make sure that you are meeting the client where they're at. Because I think religion can be so tied to our sense of identity and our sense of safety. And there can often be so much fear around letting an outsider or a non-believer or someone who doesn't have the right beliefs into that space and commenting, that you really do just come to, well, what's happening for you right now? And let's tap there without much commentary and without much guidance, other than towards health and love and wholeness, and even kind of setting out that from the get-go of what is your goal and what is your sense of where you want to get to, and just allowing your client to go there. Because often in a lot of high control environments, there's a very strong focus on dogma, correct belief, correct behavior, and this is where you have to get to. So even just that relationship with your tapping coach, practitioner, therapist, who can go, what do you think? And I'll tell you what, that can be a whole tapping session of
absolutely. And as you say that, I think back to the conversation a few hours earlier with Craig Weiner about trauma-informed tapping. I think there's two things that show up here. One is recognizing trauma-informed as a practitioner. If you're in a circumstance as a practitioner where you have religious trauma, it's really easy when a client shows up. It's like, yeah, those SOBs, blah, 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 blah. And we don't want to be tipping the scale in that direction for the clients. The other thing that I think is also really useful is, like, you know, as a coach and as a practitioner, there are times in which I can be directive, and there are times where I'm much more open-ended, and I calibrate that based on the client I'm working on, rapport, all of that sort of stuff. But what you're identifying here is, if the circumstance that you're coming from where the trauma was created in something that is hyper control, be it religious or in military or a super, super strict family, that as a practitioner, if you are being too directive with the client, all of a sudden it is possible for them to feel like they're being told what to do. In, like, when you think that with another client, you're being a helper, with this particular client, because of their experience and what the circumstance of that particular traumatic experience was, there's information about how we should be useful and a helper when we're showing up in that particular way. And I, like, until you were just talking about that sense of they're coming out of this thing that's super dogmatic, I actually hadn't connected that dot for myself in the way that I show up as a practitioner. So that's a good thing for us to recognize as we're thinking about this.
Yeah, definitely.
So for someone who is out there and they're in a circumstance where, like, light bulbs are starting to go off, like all of a sudden they have a new set of vocabulary about their past, where they might not have realized that, oh my gosh, this wasn't just this thing I didn't like doing as a child, but there is now some baggage that is being carried with me. What is an entry point for a person like that to start to understand, unpack, transform, so they're not in a circumstance like you were, where you were just kind of like, oh, I need to do something, help, like what's some guidance or thoughts or questions or ways that someone could enter in safely as they start to, like, reconcile and understand and transform and heal this part of their life? Because the thing that you said earlier, this is complex trauma, I think is so key. Like, it's one of those things, it's like, church says I was bad, I need to get over that. Like, that it can be said very simply, but this is about our identity and our community and who we see ourselves in the world and what is acceptable. That's complex. So when someone's facing a complex trauma like that at the beginning, what's a good starting point?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Gene. And I think if your relationship to religion or those light bulbs are starting to go off, going, actually, maybe my experience of religion, and, you know, we're not talking about even just one religion or one form of spirituality, right? You know, the New Age, more free-flowing. Spirituality can be traumatizing in different ways as well. But I think if you are starting to have those light bulbs go off and you're starting to go, for me, it's often people start, often it's people starting to question faith now or religion now and leaving church now, which can be very destabilizing. But also for people who can kind of reflect on their own experience and go, maybe that was more complex and I haven't actually just shut the door to that. It still impacts me now. As always, I think in cases of complex trauma, get with a practitioner.
Preach.
And talk it through and just start slow. And what's the first thing that you're starting to notice? What's the first thing that's bubbling up about how this has impacted you or a specific area that it impacted you? And just start there. Just pull one little thread at a time. And maybe spending some time taking a little bit of inventory of what was good, what was not so good. How does the good resource me now? How does the not so good impact me now? And kind of maybe starting to do a little bit of that peace procedure, again, with someone who doesn't care if you either remain in relationship with religion or who leaves, and is just going to approach you from that very trauma-informed nervous system perspective of, do you feel safe in your body right now with this belief, this practice? And then from a more individual standpoint, just, what are those specific memories that you do remember? What are some of the key phrases that you remember that kind of just linger in your head? And when you think about them, how intense are they? And just one little piece at a time, and tapping on that. That would be my go-to. And also do some research. There's a lot of emerging literature coming out now. There's just been a diagnostic tool that's come out, just so you get a better understanding of how this may have impacted you, and actually that there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain and nervous system was just molded and shaped in a particular way, and it can be molded and shaped into a more healthy expression if that's what you want.
Yeah. And just in that last little piece there are like three things I think are really super, super useful. Number one, going to a practitioner. Like, I tap with people 5 days a week, and twice a month I am sitting on the other side of a skilled practitioner. And it's one of those things that just because tapping is something that we can use by ourselves, sometimes we are so close to an issue, it's really, really hard for us to see it. The second is, I really love the question, do I feel safe as I think about this, or do I feel unsafe? Like, it's such a simple, basic question, but like, as adults, we have such complicated emotions that oftentimes we're like trying to figure out, like I have an entire workshop on the difference between regret, guilt, and shame, and it's an hour and a half long just on those three words and how we unpack it, because we're these complex emotional creatures. And just asking the question, do I feel safe or do I not? I think is just such a gentle entry point that gives us access to what is going on, where I don't have to know why, or I don't have to know how. I just know, when I think of this, my system feels unsafe. That's an entry point for me to start tapping on that.
Yeah.
The third thing that you said in there, I think that's really important to highlight is, particularly here in the United States, you asked the question about the audience before we started and where people are. Like, for those of us in the transformational community can look at very traditional Christian in the United States and go, this is the thing that traumatizes. But the fact that you've identified the fact that it happens in New Agey communities, it happens under gurus and teachers and folks that are teaching healing stuff that is not connected to what we would call Western mainline religion. Here in the United States, there have been a number of sexual abuse scandals in yoga communities and meditation communities and stuff like that, where you have this charismatic leader who is wounded themselves, and they use their charisma and their power to create a place to make people feel safe so they can then take advantage of them consciously or unconsciously. And so I think it's great that you are highlighting the fact that it's not just in the places that we think of this conservative Christian religiosity. It can be in any sort of spiritual community, because again, like you started with, we go to this place to feel safe and connected and loved and to understand our worth and value. And that doesn't happen to happen in capital R religion. It can happen in lowercase s spirituality in those communities, and to recognize that it can be happening in those places as well. And we might have a blind spot to think that, oh my gosh, yes, it was in this yoga community that I was in, or this meditation community I was in, where the exact same things were happening to me.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Gene, is that, you look at the history of humanity, and humans are inherently religious spiritual creatures. Like, from the get-go, we're doing some form of myth-making ritual in order to make sense of a chaotic world, to have a form of cultural identity or shared identity. It's an inherent part of us. And so one of the things that I want to make clear from my perspective is that I don't think any one particular religion or spirituality is traumatizing. I think religion at its heart is humans having some form of inner experience and going, how do we make sense of this collectively? And how do we share this collective awe and myth-making and sense-making experience? And, we have saints for a reason. We have gurus for a reason, because some people are able to take those symbols and those practices, which are shaping our brain and nervous system. Neuroscience is showing us what prayer, meditation, yoga does to the brain. And it helps people face their trauma and face off with the shadow and the darker aspects of us, I guess, and transform it into something beautiful and holy, if we want to use that word. And there's a sense of wonder. And like anything else, religion can be used by the ego to hide from our shadow and to run away from our trauma and to prop up or to make us feel safe from a more primitive, dark space as well. And so that's what we're really looking at here is any form of religious or spiritual experience that was not used in a healthy, healthful, kind, loving way. And that's what we're wanting to heal, so that we can come back to that heart space, which might lead you back to your faith of origin, or it might lead you in a very different way, but still those qualities of love, peace, wonder, awe, forgiveness, all of those qualities that we kind of aspire to. And that's a lifelong journey. Like I've been tapping on this stuff for 10 years or more, and still I work with a therapist, and I'll think, oh, this topic doesn't have anything to do with my religious upbringing. And I'm like, oh no, wait a minute.
There it is again.
There it is.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Mitch, thank you very much for your time. But more importantly, thank you for such a thoughtful, loving, kind conversation about something that is oftentimes really hard to talk about, because we don't talk about sex, money, politics, and religion in polite conversation, and to just like to have such deep, thoughtful heart for this, I think is just such a real service. So thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.